May 1945. The spring morning was cool and damp, mist hanging low over processing barracks, where 73 German prisoners waited for medical clearance. Captain Robert Morrison, U.S. Army Medical Corps, had examined 62 of them, routine checks, standard malnutrition, the predictable aftermath of Germany's collapse. Then a boy stepped forward, slight, hollow-eyed, wearing a uniform that hung like drapery on bones. Morrison gestured to the scale. The needle settled at 68 pounds. For a moment, nobody moved. The boy was 15 years old. He should have weighed twice that. What the exam revealed would haunt Morrison for 50 years. Heinrich Becker had turned 15 in March 1945, in a bunker outside Berlin, while the city burned around him. There had been no celebration. No cake, no family gathering, no acknowledgement that another year had passed. Just another day of surviving in circumstances that had stopped resembling anything a child should experience. He had been conscripted in January, when the regime's desperation had become so absolute that age ceased to matter. The Volkssturm People's Storm swept up anyone who could hold a rifle. Old men, young boys, anyone the collapsing military could press into service. Heinrich had been given a uniform 3 sizes too large, a rifle with 5 rounds of ammunition, and orders to defend positions that were already lost. He had never wanted to be a soldier, had never believed in the cause that had consumed his country. But belief wasn't required, only presence. Only the willingness to stand in trenches, while Soviet artillery turned the world into fire and shrapnel and screaming. His unit, if the scattered collection of terrified civilians could be called a unit, had held a sector east of Berlin for 3 days. Then the line collapsed. Some men fled west, toward American forces and the possibility of gentler captivity. Others stayed and died. Heinrich ran west with 5 others, through devastation that had no name, past bodies and burning vehicles and the evidence of empire ending. They ate what they could find. Rats when they could catch them. Roots dug from frozen ground. Occasionally, dead horses if they reached the carcass before it spoiled completely. Heinrich learned that hunger was a physical presence, a companion more constant than any human, an ache that never truly stopped. By the time American forces captured them near Magdeburg in late April, Heinrich had lost 40 pounds from a frame that hadn't had 40 pounds to spare. He was skeletal, exhausted, running on nothing but the animal instinct to continue moving forward because stopping meant dying. The Americans processed them with bureaucratic efficiency. Documentation, basic search for weapons, assignment to transport heading west. Heinrich moved through it like a ghost, barely present, conserving what little energy remained. The train journey across Germany, then France, then a ship across the Atlantic. Heinrich barely remembered it. Days blurred into nights, blurred into days. He was fed occasionally, American rations that his shrunken stomach couldn't fully digest. He slept in fits, never deeply, always ready to wake and run if danger materialized. America, when they finally arrived, seemed impossible. Buildings standing intact, cities undamaged by bombing, people who looked fed and whole. It was like visiting another planet, a place where war existed only as distant rumor rather than immediate reality. Camp Atterbury sprawled across 40,000 acres of Indiana farmland. Established in 1942 as a training facility, converted partially to house German posts by 1943. By May 1945, it held over 3,000 prisoners engaged in agricultural work throughout southern Indiana. Heinrich and 72 others arrived on a morning when spring rain had turned everything to mud. They were unloaded from trucks, lined up in the processing yard, told through interpreters that they would undergo medical examination before assignment to barracks. Heinrich stood in line, swaying slightly, his vision occasionally graying at the edges. Around him, other prisoners talked in quiet German, speculating about what American captivity would mean. Heinrich said nothing. He had stopped having the energy for speculation. Captain Robert Morrison had been examining German posts for 2 years. He had seen malnutrition before, had treated men suffering from months of inadequate rations and the physical toll of combat. He knew what war did to bodies, how deprivation manifested in specific measurable ways. But the boy who stepped forward at 10:45 hours stopped Morrison mid-note. A child, and there was no other word for someone who looked 12, despite documentation claiming 15, could barely stand upright. His uniform hung so loose that Morrison could see the outline of every rib through the fabric. His face was gaunt, cheekbones prominent to the point of deformity. His hands trembled constantly, fine motor control compromised by extreme malnutrition. Name? Morrison asked through the interpreter. Heinrich Becker. Age? 15. The interpreter translated, though Heinrich's voice was barely audible. Morrison wrote this down, noting his own skepticism. The boy looked prepubescent. Wait. Morrison gestured to the scale. Heinrich stepped on carefully, as if the platform might collapse. The needle moved, settled. 68 pounds. Morrison checked the scale's calibration, certain it was broken. But no, the mechanism was fine. This child weighed 68 pounds. For context, a healthy 15-year-old boy should weigh between 110 and 140 pounds, depending on height. Heinrich was approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall. He should have weighed at minimum 115 pounds. He was 47 pounds underweight. Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest. How long? He asked. How long have you been this thin? Heinrich looked confused by the question. Since January, maybe? The interpreter translated. Hard to remember. Everything is ... blurry. Sit down, Morrison said gently. Before you fall down. He conducted the examination with growing concern. Heinrich's pulse was weak and irregular. His blood pressure was dangerously low. His skin had the paper-thin quality of severe malnutrition. His hair, what little remained, came out in clumps when touched. His teeth were loose in his gums. Morrison checked for edema swelling that indicated organ failure. Found it in Heinrich's feet and ankles. Checked his abdomen distended, which suggested either ascites or simply the bloating that accompanied starvation. Looked into his eyes, yellowed slightly, indicating liver stress. This is severe malnutrition, Morrison said to his medical assistant. Likely organ damage. He needs immediate hospitalization, not camp assignment. The Assistant Corporal James Walsh looked at Heinrich with visible shock. Sir, how is he still alive? I don't know. Shear wheel, maybe? Or just hasn't died yet. Morrison made notes in Heinrich's medical file. Then he called over the camp commandant, Major William Harrison, who was overseeing processing. Sir, we have a problem. This prisoner needs immediate medical intervention. He's not fit for standard camp housing. Harrison looked at Heinrich, his expression shifting from bureaucratic efficiency to genuine concern. How old? 15. 68 pounds. Multiple indicators of organ stress. He should be in a hospital, not a POW camp. Harrison nodded. Get him to the base hospital. Full medical workup. Keep him there as long as necessary. Morrison turned to Heinrich. You're going to the hospital, he said through the interpreter. We're going to help you. Heinrich's expression suggested he didn't quite believe this. Why? He asked. I am enemy. Why help? Because you're dying, Morrison replied bluntly. And we don't let people die when we can prevent it. Even enemies. The base hospital occupied a cluster of buildings near Camp Atterbury's administrative center. Clean, well-equipped, staffed by medical personnel who were overqualified for treating routine military ailments, but grateful for assignments that didn't involve combat zones. Heinrich was admitted to Ward 3, assigned a bed in a room with 2 other patients, both American soldiers recovering from training injuries. The contrast was jarring. The Americans looked healthy, well-fed, their injuries temporary. Heinrich looked like a war victim from newsreel footage, the kind of image that made people donate to relief funds. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chun, reviewed Morrison's notes with increasing alarm. 68 pounds. 15 years old. Multiple organ stress indicators. She had treated malnutrition before, in refugee populations, in liberated camps, in the aftermath of Germany's collapse. But this was among the worst cases she had encountered in someone who was still conscious and mobile. She examined Heinrich thoroughly, drew blood for comprehensive testing, ordered chest x-rays to check for tuberculosis and lung damage, conducted neurological assessments to determine if malnutrition had caused brain injury. The results came back over the following days. Heinrich was suffering from severe protein energy malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies across the board, anemia so severe his blood could barely carry sufficient oxygen. In short, Heinrich was dying slowly, multiple organ systems failing simultaneously, kept alive only by youth, and whatever stubborn will had carried him this far. Dr. Chun consulted with Morrison, and then the camp's senior medical staff. The question, could Heinrich be saved? And if so, how? The protocol for refeeding severely malnourished patients was delicate. Too much food too quickly would cause refeeding syndrome, a potentially fatal condition where sudden nutrition overwhelmed damaged organs. They needed to restore Heinrich's health gradually, carefully, monitoring every system for signs of crisis. Chun started him on a liquid diet. Broth, diluted juice, small amounts of easily digestible nutrients. Heinrich's stomach could barely handle it. He vomited after the first feeding, his body having forgotten how to process actual food. But Chun persisted, adjusting the formula, going slower, building tolerance ounce by careful ounce. Heinrich spent the first week mostly sleeping. His body, given permission to rest, shut down everything except essential functions. He slept 16, 18, 20 hours daily, waking only to take small amounts of food and use the bathroom with assistance. The hospital staff watched him with something between clinical interest and emotional investment. This wasn't just a patient. This was a child enemy nation, or not, who had been starved to the edge of death and now had to relearn how to live. Nurse Betty Morrison, no relation to Captain Morrison, was assigned as Heinrich's primary nurse. She was 43 years old, had 3 sons, and looked at Heinrich with the practical compassion of someone who understood that children should unsuffer regardless of their nationality. She sat with him when he was awake, spoke to him in slow, simple English that he gradually began understanding, helped him eat when his hands shook too badly to hold a spoon, changed his bedding when his body was too weak to maintain basic functions, treated him with dignity that Heinrich had forgotten existed. One evening, after Heinrich had been in the hospital for 10 days, Betty found him crying silently in his bed. She sat down beside him. "What's wrong?" she asked. Heinrich struggled for English words. "Why you help me? I am enemy. My country did terrible things. Why you are kind?" Betty considered her response carefully. "Because you're 15 years old. Because you're dying, and we can help. Because the war is over and punishment isn't our job. Because you're a child who deserves a chance to grow up, even if your government made terrible choices." "I don't deserve," Heinrich whispered. Betty shook her head firmly. "That's not your decision to make. We've decided you deserve care. You just have to accept it." Heinrich didn't fully understand all the English, but he understood the tone. He nodded slowly and let Betty adjust his pillows and bring him another small meal that he forced himself to eat. Weeks passed. Heinrich's weight climbed with painful slowness. 68 pounds, 71, 75, 80. Each pound a victory, each ounce proof that dying could be reversed. His body relearned how to function. His stomach adapted to regular food. His organs began recovering from the stress of prolonged starvation. His skin regained some elasticity. His hair started growing back. His hands stopped trembling quite so constantly. Dr. Chun documented everything meticulously. This was medically significant, a case study in recovering from extreme malnutrition in adolescence. But it was also personally significant. She was watching a child return from the edge of death, and the transformation was both miraculous and heartbreaking. Because as Heinrich recovered physically, the psychological damage became more apparent. He had nightmares, violent, screaming nightmares that woke the entire ward. He flinched at sudden noises. He hoarded food, hiding rolls and crackers in his pillowcase, even though meals came regularly. He couldn't accept that safety was real, that care was genuine, that he wasn't one mistake away from being abandoned to die. The camp chaplain, Father Thomas O'Malley, began visiting Heinrich regularly. O'Malley spoke some German, could communicate more effectively than most hospital staff. He didn't try to convert Heinrich or discuss theology. He just talked about Indiana, about America, about the world beyond war and captivity. One afternoon in June, sitting beside Heinrich's bed while early summer sun filtered through the window, O'Malley asked, "What do you want to do? After you recover? After the war ends properly, And you can go home? Heinrich stared at his hands. Home, he said in broken English. I don't know if I have home. Berlin is destroyed. My parents ... I don't know if they are alive. Then what? Heinrich was quiet for a long time. Maybe learn something. Something useful. Something that builds instead of destroys. Like what? I don't know. Maybe medicine. Maybe farming. Anything that helps people live instead of die. O'Malley nodded. That's a good answer. And we can help with that. While you're here, while you're recovering, you can learn. English first, then other things. And so Heinrich's recovery became education. Nurse Betty brought him English primers, children's books that he read haltingly, building vocabulary. Dr. Chun explained medical procedures to him, let him observe when appropriate, treated him like a student as well as a patient. Father O'Malley brought books, fiction, history, geography, opening windows to a world larger than war. By July, Heinrich weighed 90 pounds. Still underweight, but no longer skeletal. Still fragile, but no longer dying. Dr. Chun downgraded him from critical to stable. Captain Morrison, during a follow-up exam, documented the transformation. Patient has gained 22 pounds in 8 weeks. Organ function normalizing. Prognosis changed from poor to good. Recommend continued medical monitoring, but patient is cleared for standard camp assignment. Heinrich's reaction to this news was complicated. Relief that he had survived. Fear about leaving the hospital's safety for the uncertainty of the regular POW camp. Gratitude for the care he had received. And profound confusion about why Americans had invested so much effort in saving an enemy child. In August, Heinrich was transferred to the main camp. He had been in the hospital for 3 months, longer than any other patient that year. The staff had become attached to him, this quiet German boy who had arrived dying and had somehow fought his way back to life. Betty gave him a gift before he left, a small English-German dictionary. So you can keep learning, she said. So you can communicate when you go home. Heinrich clutched the book like treasure. Thank you, he said in careful English. For everything. For saving my life. Betty hugged him, brief and maternal. You saved your own life. You fought to survive. We just provided the conditions that made survival possible. The main camp felt overwhelming after the hospital's quiet. Hundreds of prisoners, structured routines, work details. Heinrich was assigned to light duty. His body still wasn't strong enough for agricultural labor helping in the camp. Library, organizing materials, assisting with English language classes for other prisoners. He discovered something unexpected. Other prisoners looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. He was the boy who weighed 68 pounds, the survivor who had been too starved to stand, but had somehow lived. His survival became a kind of legend, proof that even the worst circumstances could be endured. One evening, an older prisoner named Klaus approached him in the library. You were in the hospital for 3 months, Klaus observed. What was it like? Heinrich considered. Like being human again. Like remembering that people could be kind without requiring anything in return. The Americans were good to you? Better than good. They saved my life when they had no reason to. When I was just another enemy prisoner, Klaus nodded slowly. Maybe that means something. About who they are. About what happens after wars end. Heinrich had been thinking about this constantly. The Americans could have let him die. Could have given him minimal care and called it adequate. Instead, they had treated him like a patient deserving full medical intervention. Had invested resources and time in saving one enemy child. The message this sent was powerful and uncomfortable. It suggested that Germany's propaganda about American cruelty had been lies. It suggested that enemies could choose mercy over vengeance. It suggested that the war, S outcome Germany, S defeat, might not be the catastrophe German leadership had claimed it would be. In September, Major Harrison called Heinrich to his office. Heinrich went nervously, uncertain what command wanted with him. Harrison gestured to a chair. Sit down, son. Not in trouble. Just want to talk. Heinrich sat, hands folded carefully in his lap. Harrison consulted a file Heinrich's medical records, thick with documentation. You've been here 4 months. You've gained 27 pounds. Dr. Chun says you're going to make a full recovery. Yes, sir. I am grateful. Harrison leaned back. Here's the situation. Repatriation is being organized. You'll go back to Germany, probably by December. The question is, what happens when you get there? Heinrich had no answer. Germany was destroyed. His family's fate was unknown. He was 15 years old with no skills, no resources, no clear path forward. I don't know, Heinrich admitted. Harrison nodded. That's what I thought. So here's what I'm proposing. While you're here, while we're waiting for repatriation, we can help you prepare. More education, vocational training, whatever helps you survive when you go back. Why? Heinrich asked. Why help enemy prisoner? Harrison's expression was patient. Because you're 15 years old. Because you almost died. Because the war is over, and our job now isn't punishment. It's preparing people to rebuild what was destroyed. You understand? Heinrich understood intellectually, but emotionally the generosity still felt impossible. Yes, sir, I understand. And yes, I want to learn. Want to be ready for home. Good, Harrison made notes. We'll set you up with more intensive English classes, basic vocational training. You have preference? Something you want to learn? Medicine, Heinrich said immediately. I want to learn medicine. Help people like doctors helped me. Harrison smiled slightly. That's ambitious. But we can start with basic medical training. First aid, nursing assistance. Foundation for more education later. And so Heinrich's captivity became education. He attended English classes daily, his language skills improving dramatically. He worked in the camp infirmary under Dr. Chun's supervision, learning basic medical procedures, understanding how bodies worked and how healing happened. He studied at night using books the camp library provided, reading about anatomy and physiology and the science of keeping people alive. The other prisoners noticed his dedication. Some admired this determination to turn captivity into opportunity. Others resented it, viewed his cooperation with Americans as collaboration, as betraying some principle of remaining hostile, even in defeat. Klaus, who had become a friend, defended Heinrich during one such conversation. He's 15. He almost died. If Americans want to teach him medicine, that's not collaboration, that's survival. He's learning from the enemy, another prisoner objected. The enemy saved his life. Klaus shot back. Maybe we should be grateful they were kind enough to educate him instead of just keeping him barely alive until they ship him home. The argument revealed the complicated politics of captivity. Some prisoners maintained rigid hostility toward Americans, preserving national pride through resistance, even when resistance achieved nothing. Others, like Heinrich and Klaus, recognized that accepting American help wasn't weakness, but pragmatism taking advantage of circumstances to prepare for futures that would require every skill they could acquire. October brought cooler weather and preparation for eventual repatriation. Heinrich had been at Camp Atterbury for 5 months. He now weighed 95 pounds, still underweight for his height, but approaching normal. His health had stabilized completely. Dr. Chun declared him medically fit for return to Germany. But the psychological transformation was even more significant than the physical one. Heinrich had arrived dying, terrified, convinced that American captivity would be harsh punishment for Germany's crimes. Instead, he had received medical care that saved his life, education that prepared him for a future, and treatment that suggested enemies could become something other than permanent adversaries. One evening, helping organize medical supplies in the infirmary, Heinrich asked Dr. Chun a question that had been building for months. Why did you save me? Specifically me. You could have done minimal treatment, kept me alive enough to survive, sent me to regular camp. Why full medical intervention? Dr. Chun continued counting bandages while considering her response. Because that's what doctors do. We see someone dying, and we try to save them. Your nationality doesn't change that obligation, but I'm German. My country did terrible things. Dr. Chun set down her clipboard. Yes, Germany did terrible things. That's historical fact. But you're 15 years old. You didn't start the war. You didn't choose to be conscripted. You were swept up in something larger than yourself. Punishing you for your government's crimes would be pointless and cruel. She paused, then continued. Here's what I believe, Heinrich. Wars create enemies, but wars also end. When they end, we have a choice. We can maintain enmity forever, or we can try to rebuild something better. Treating you humanely, educating you, preparing you to help rebuild Germany. That's us choosing to build something better." Heinrich absorbed this. "You think I can help rebuild? I think you have to. Your generation, the ones who survived this war, you're the ones who'll determine what Germany becomes. If we send you home starved and bitter, you'll carry that bitterness forward. If we send you home healthy and educated, maybe you'll carry that forward instead." The logic was profound and uncomfortable. Heinrich realized that American kindness wasn't naive or sentimental. It was strategic, purposeful, designed to shape post-war outcomes. But that didn't make it less valuable. If anything, it made it more powerful mercy as policy rather than exception. December brought repatriation orders. Heinrich was scheduled for transport in mid-month, part of a group returning to the American occupation zone in Germany. His 5 months at Camp Atterbury had transformed him from dying child to healthy adolescent with skills and education that would serve him in whatever came next. The hospital staff organized a small farewell. Nothing official regulations didn't permit celebration for departing enemy prisoners, but Betty and Dr. Chun and several others gathered quietly to say goodbye. Betty gave him another gift, a medical textbook, first aid manual, English language, but with illustrations that transcended language barriers. "Study this," she said. "It'll help you help others." Dr. Chun provided something more practical letters of reference, describing Heinrich's character and work ethic, useful when seeking employment or education in occupied Germany. And a note, handwritten, that said simply, "You survived because you refused to give up. Keep refusing. The world needs people like you." Father O'Malley blessed him in formal, personal, a prayer for safe journey and meaningful future. "You're going to do good things," he told Heinrich. "I believe that." Captain Morrison, who had conducted that first shocking examination, shook Heinrich's hand. "You weighed 68 pounds when you arrived. You weigh 95 now. That's 27 pounds of American food and German stubbornness. Use both wisely." Heinrich tried to respond, but found himself crying, instead not sad tears, but overwhelmed gratitude for people who had saved him when they had no obligation to do so. "Thank you," he managed in English, "for everything. I will not forget." The transport departed Camp Atterbury on December 15th. Heinrich sat in the truck watching Indiana farmland pass by, remembering arriving 5 months earlier, barely able to stand, leaving healthy and prepared for whatever awaited in defeated Germany. Bremen, January 1946. The city was rubble and reconstruction in equal measure. Heinrich processed through British occupation authorities, presented his American documentation, was assigned to a displaced persons camp while his family's status was investigated. He learned his parents had survived. His mother was in Munich, his father in a different camp awaiting denazification screening. His younger sister lived with their mother. The house was destroyed, but family existed. He traveled south to Munich, carrying his medical textbook and letters of reference and 27 pounds of weight gain that represented 5 months of American care. His mother wept when she saw him. This son who had been conscripted at 14, who had disappeared into the war's final chaos, who had been presumed dead. She barely recognized him. Not just because he had grown, though he had, but because he carried himself differently, with confidence that seemed impossible for a child who had experienced what he had experienced. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Where were you?" "American prison camp," Heinrich replied. "They saved my life, taught me medicine, gave me a future when I thought I had none." He showed her the textbook, the letters, explained about Dr. Chun and Betty and the months of recovery and education. His mother listened with disbelief that gradually transformed into wondering gratitude. "The Americans did this? For you? For a German prisoner?" "Yes," Heinrich confirmed. "Because they believed I deserved a chance despite everything." Heinrich Becker used that chance. He completed his education in occupied Germany, attended medical school in the 1950s, became a doctor specializing in nutrition and treating malnutrition in post-war populations. He worked for decades in refugee camps, in developing nations, anywhere people suffered from the kind of starvation he had experienced. In 1975, he was interviewed for a medical journal about his approach to treating malnutrition. Asked about his expertise's origin, Heinrich described arriving at Camp Atterbury weighing 68 pounds. I was dying. American doctors saved me, not because they had to, but because they believed even enemy children deserved care. That experience shaped everything I've done since. Every patient I treat, I remember that I was once that patient. And someone chose to save me. He maintained correspondence with Dr. Chun until her death in 1988, with Betty Morrison until her death in 1991, with Father O'Malley until his death in 1995. Each relationship was testament to connections forged in impossible circumstances, maintained across decades and continents. Heinrich Becker died in 2003 at age 73. His obituary noted a distinguished medical career, his specialization in treating malnutrition, his advocacy for humanitarian medical care, regardless of nationality or circumstance. It mentioned that he had been a German POW who had received life-saving treatment in American custody. But what it couldn't capture was the moment when a 15-year-old boy weighing 68 pounds stepped onto a scale at Camp Atterbury and sparked medical intervention that would save his life and shape his future. The moment when Captain Morrison had looked at a dying child and said, "We don't let people die when we can prevent it." The moment when American medical personnel had chosen to save an enemy's life, because that is what medicine required regardless of war. Heinrich had arrived at that camp expecting nothing but survival. He left 5 months later carrying the gift of restored health, acquired education, and the understanding that enemies could choose mercy. That gift echoed forward through 50 years of medical practice, through thousands of patients treated, through the example of a doctor who had once been saved and had spent his life returning that gift to others. A medical exam that shocked everyone 68 pounds, 15 years old, multiple organ failure, became the beginning of everything Heinrich built afterward.